Eric, welcome back to This Is Horror Podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm really excited to be here and chatting with you about all things horror. I'm so excited. I love the show, and it's just great to come back on as a guest.
Yeah, it is always great to have you here and conversations with you. I greatly look forward to them. I think talking to you and talking to Josh Malaman, it's like, yes, I always know that it's going to be a good time, that I'm going to come away invigorated, and perhaps we're even gonna bleed a little. I mean, hopefully not literally, but we've got the video on should that happen.
You never know with me around. You never know.
Yeah. But I mean, the last time that we had a conversation, it was in the summer of last year. So, as I often like to ask, I wonder what some of the biggest changes for you have been in that time, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, it has been since last summer. It seems like just yesterday we were chatting.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, as far as like professional changes, just working on a lot of new stories and novels. Editing a lot of new pieces, and I actually just finished copy edits today for a novel that we have not announced yet, but we're hoping to announce next week or the week after. I don't know when this is going to air, but hopefully, like end of March, we're going to announce. And I'm really excited because this project has been like brewing for a couple years now, and I worked with an amazing editor on this one, and the cover art looks amazing, and everything's we're kind of just preparing everything ahead of time to go so that we can make like this huge announcement. And I think people's faces are just gonna like melt when they see, what we have in store for them. So that's been really cool. Personal stuff, I'm still in Boston, still writing a lot in Boston, still with my partner Ali, and we're just enjoying time together and spending time with my family and spending time with friends, going to events. I'm going to go to StokerCon at the end of May, which is really exciting because Everything the Darkness Eats is nominated for superior achievement in a first novel. So that's really cool. Yeah, just a lot of good stuff on the horizon, I feel like.
And I mean, you mentioned the nomination for Everything the Darkness Eats. And so I recall the last time that we spoke, you had been a little disappointed with the initial response, the initial release of Everything the Darkness Eats. And so, I mean, one of the things you'd done is you'd put out a kind of different edition with a different ending. And I recall saying to you, yeah, you shouldn't be disappointed because this is a marathon, it isn't a sprint, and we're so near the start of the race. If we're going to continue with this bizarre analogy, well, if we fast forward, it's been nominated for numerous awards, it's been on various best of year lists. So I'm wondering, have your feelings changed in terms of the yeah, just the feelings towards Everything the Darkness Eats and its success?
Yes and no. It's obviously, I would be lying if I said that I was, not grateful for the nomination. I'm incredibly grateful for this nomination from the Bram Stoker Awards, and I'm so delighted that the book has been like basically validated by my peers. That's an incredible feeling. I do have very complex feelings about that book, and I I still struggle with it sometimes, but it's crazy because that book continues to open doors for me that I never imagined that it would. For instance, there's been a little bit of movie interest behind the scenes with that book, and I don't know if anything's going to come of it, but it's just it's very very humbling to know that people are responding to that piece, and that it's making its way into the world. And I think if anything, I do regret being somewhat vocal about my disappointment with the book's reception, because when a book is released into the world, you give it over to the public, you give it over to readers, and however they choose to interpret that book, that gift, that offering, it's up to them, and it no longer really belongs to you. I know some people may not agree with that, but um, a book is a gift that you give to the world, I think. And a book's life cycle, a normal book's life cycle, is some people love it, some people hate it, some people are in between on it. You get 5 stars, you get 1 star, you get 3 stars. It varies, and it's a normal healthy life cycle for a book. um, and that's all I could ask for, and that's basically what I received with this book. And I received even more with this book. I received, like you said, but a couple best of 2023 lists, which was incredible, and also the nomination from the Horror Writers Association was very, just it really perked me up a lot with what I had been going through. And um, to receive that validation, I know I shouldn't put so much emphasis on validation from others. I know I should look inward for that, but I'm not a robot, and I do crave that validation from other people, and I I yearn to be told that I did something correct, that I wrote well, that I wrote a good book. That to me is, it's it's what defines me a lot of the time. I struggle because I know I need to separate myself from my work more, but um, my writing is so intertwined with my being. It's hard to separate myself from it. Um, so, to get back to answering your question, my relationship with the book has not changed, but it has softened a lot, which is great, which is really a great step back toward, you know, how I felt when I first wrote it, when I first was falling in love with those characters, when I was falling in love with the setting of Henley's Edge, Connecticut. Um, and I'm really excited to see where the book continues to take me, just like all of my other books. I'm really excited for the future, and what the future holds.
Yeah, I don't think you should regret it, or I guess like I wouldn't regret being vocal in the way that you were, because I think first of all it was with the best of intentions. You didn't do it in a way that was disparaging to readers, to the publisher, to anyone. The only person you might have sometimes been disparaging to is yourself. You never kind of did anything negative towards anyone else. And I think what is really beneficial about just being honest and being raw and being authentic is that it allows other readers and writers and professionals to see that this is a human reaction, and actually it's okay to sometimes feel disappointed. I mean, I think if the vast majority of us were to be honest, we all probably have disappointments with nearly every release, because unless we're Stephen King, there is always going to be someone who's doing a little bit and maybe a lot better than we are. So I think in being public with those struggles and those disappointments, it allows other people to do that as well. And, in a kind of age where it's all curated highlights and the best of on social media, it's good to be reminded that actually this is reality. So I think what you did was a good thing, and I think you did it in the best possible way because you not only kind of humanized the whole experience, but you didn't disparage anyone else along the way. So you couldn't have done it better than that.
I'm really glad that you think that of me and how my feelings toward the book. I've noticed that as my platform continues to grow in horror and publishing, I've become a little bit more guarded and a little bit more carefully curating what I put out there, just because I don't I hate to say I don't want to upset anybody, but I also do want to upset people with my work, my fiction. But me as a person, I want to be a decent human and a decent like role model in horror, and someone who is just kind-hearted and generous and loving. That's what I want to be as a human being, as a public figure and an author. So I definitely struggle with what should I put out? Should I be more vulnerable? Should I tweet this thought? I don't necessarily think you should tweet like your every feeling. But because feelings are just so fleeting, and how you feel 1 minute is just, you're not going to feel the same in 10 minutes, an hour. Um, it depends, I guess. But I really have noticed that I've felt like this pressure, and it's not from, I don't feel like it's from anybody around me or anybody that I think is like watching me, but rather just this pressure I put on myself to be perfect and just uh not be as like vulnerable with people. But I do realize like that vulnerability shows your humanity, and people can really connect with that more, like you said, like it shows the humanness that we go through with releases, because obviously every release is not going to be amazing unless we're Stephen King or Neil Gaiman. Some releases are going to hit, and then other releases just aren't going to be as successful as other ones, and that's something that I'm also coming to terms with. So it's definitely a learning curve, and I hope I hope I have a lot more years, many more years to continue to learn.
Yeah, I think we just have to really be true to ourselves, but also do what makes us feel good,
Hmm.
and just using those two things to guide us. And, in terms of social media and public presence, it's going to differ from person to person and at different times of that person's life and of their career. So it really is a case by case. And I mean, I found before my divorce and child custody battle that I was more public with my private life, but right now I am a lot more private about my private life. I rarely mention it, and when I do, it's in much vaguer terms, and that's just what feels right for me at
Hmm.
the moment. And sometimes there'll be a tweet or something that I want to put out that is authentic, but then it doesn't make me feel good. I might even draft it up, and it's like, actually, I don't want to do that. And I think there's this damaging effect as well, where if let's say a tweet isn't engaged with a lot, then you start feeling shitty, or you start
Yeah.
feeling like it's a reflection on you, or that you did something wrong. And really, a lot of it is part of the algorithm and the system. And yeah, you're then kind of projecting your own happiness based on the arbitrary, or in fact the very deliberate makings of a machine, and that is not a healthy way to live. So I think, does it make you feel good? is it true to yourself? And if so, then you post that and you say that, and you reserve the right to be able to delete it later. You reserve the right to be able to change your mind, or to be like, right, I know I said this, but I got it wrong because I'm human, or because, yeah, I changed. You don't step into the same river twice. You're not the same person today as you were yesterday.
Absolutely. I mean, my manager, my film TV manager, Ryan Lewis, and I have talked about this before. And he told me something that always stuck with me. And he told me this like long before even things have gotten worse since we last spoke came out. When I was kind of like under the radar, like, trying to get more traction, trying to publish with more presses. And he told me about tweeting in general, how if you feel like what you're tweeting doesn't make you feel good inside, don't tweet it. But if you look at your tweet draft and you feel like this is good, I want to put this out into the world. I feel like I'm putting out good energy. I will feel happy even if this gets really no engagement whatsoever. It's not about the engagement. It's just about me putting a little blip out into the universe, and maybe someone will respond or see it. He said, if you feel that way about a tweet or a post on Facebook or Instagram, then post it. But never tweet or post from a place of like rage or anger or upset. Um, I feel like that leads to a lot of just really awful, like what could be really awful interactions. It's so difficult to navigate now. And I feel like, well, it's not even called Twitter anymore, it's called X, but I feel like that platform, um, it just has shifted so much over the past year. And but I feel like other apps have also shifted too. So I feel like everybody's just like scrambling, trying to find a sense of like what's actually going on, like where are we congregating now? And um I think it'll settle down in time. I think we'll establish a place like soon enough. But um yeah, for the most part, when I look at something I want to post, um, especially on Twitter/X. Like, I really think, am I happy doing this? Like, do I find joy posting about this?
Yeah, and I think related to that as well, sometimes people post out of obligation, or that, they feel that they need to. They feel like, I haven't said anything for a while, and it's okay to remain silent. You don't
Quiet.
have to. If you've got nothing to say, then just respect that. That's fine. I mean, that kind of applies to a lot of issues as well. I mean, there's all sorts of complicated things going on in the world, and I often don't publicly weigh in on these things because I'm not an authority. I'm not the person you should be listening to. And actually, I'm just trying to listen. I'm trying to find out what's going on. And there are times to be the talker, there are times to be the listener.
I'm so glad you said that because I'm someone, I prefer to listen more than anything. I'm very backseat kind of person. Like, stuff like this, like, I mean, this is a friendly conversation, so it's fine. But like, I don't love getting up in front of people and talking like I'm some authority figure, like I'm some expert on the craft of writing. And because it's all so subjective, it's all so like user preference. Like, who am I to dictate how you write a story or how you develop a character or whatever? So I prefer to kind of sit back and listen. I'm not someone that like absolutely loves to talk constantly. um I feel like if you're not listening, then you're not really learning. And I feel like we really, as a society, we really need more people who are interested in learning than they are in just like talking.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you said before that in the past year, and I think it's unarguable that your popularity has risen, and you've been speaking about some of the knock-on effects of that. But I mean, I just wonder, and there's not a intricately formed question here, but how do you feel about that? How are you reacting, both the good and the bad? It sounds like you feel more a weight of responsibility in terms of your public persona, but how is that affecting you on a deeper level?
Mhm.
And how, if at all, does that even affect the writing or the creative process? How does that affect your personal life?
It's a great question because it elements have seeped into my personal life and my writing a little bit. I do feel a little bit of responsibility. I feel a weight uh, to either address certain things or analyze certain aspects of queerness, of queer identity. um, it's difficult because I don't want to be a spokesperson for, the entire LGBTQ plus community. I don't want to be just like like a mouthpiece. Um, but I also recognize the fact that people are interested in my work and they're interested in what I'm going to write about, which is so surreal to me. And I'm so incredibly grateful for everybody who picks up one of my books and reads it, like actually reads it cover to cover. And even if you give it like 1 or 2 stars, like I'm still so incredibly grateful that you took time out of your life to read something that I wrote. So I feel not only a responsibility for addressing certain issues and behaving a certain way, something, someone with like dignity and respect, but I also feel a responsibility to deliver really quality writing. And I feel that responsibility is more pronounced more than ever, especially as I move up to bigger publishing houses and work with more higher profile people. The novel that we're going to be announcing at the end of this month, it's a partnership with, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's a partnership with an A-list Hollywood actor, and it's incredible. Like his reach. He is like he's a fan of my work, and he really believes in me. And he his agent contacted me like the month after Things Have Gotten Worse came out, the original edition in 2021, and we've been setting this up for like 3 years now. So I feel an incredible amount of responsibility now, and um, like I said, I am trying to separate myself more from my work, but it's really difficult because so much of me informs my work and so much of my like essence and being is like just infused in what I write about. So it's really hard to separate myself in a lot of ways, but um, that's why I'm in therapy.
Yeah, yeah. And when you first mentioned this forthcoming novel, my interest was piqued. I don't know what we say for the level where it goes beyond peaked, but whatever that term is, we just hit it when you mentioned the A-list celebrity that is involved in it. And so we need to make a decision now, because when you first mentioned it, I thought, right, well, we will have to talk about that when you're next on the show, when it's kind of more aligned with that release. But we have some options here. We could just talk about this, and I will put this episode live once the announcement has been made, or we can save it until next time. So I'm going to let you choose how we go about that.
Why don't we save it for next time? But when we're off the air, I'll obviously tell you all about it.
Yeah, the video viewers, they probably got a bit excited there. They're like, "Oh, is there going to be an announcement?" I'm look. It sounds very exciting, and
The minute
we'll,
I'm
we'll
able
get
to
we'll get there next time. And yeah,
Yeah, the minute I'm able to, like, really talk about it publicly, I will be screaming about it, believe me.
yeah. So make sure that you are following Eric on all those social platforms, and you're gonna find out. I'm looking forward to it, but that's enough of that for now. Then to be continued in
Yep,
terms of
to be
that
continued.
particular area. But what we absolutely can talk about, one of the primary reasons that we're here is you have a new collection that will be released imminently. This skin was once mine. And I mean, you were talking about this pressure to deliver quality writing, particularly as your star is rising, to use another terrible metaphor. But last year, I mean, with the trees grew because I bled there. I would say that was one of the short story collections of the year. So to write a second short story collection the following year, that's a lot of pressure to put on oneself. But I mean, it was a tough task to follow. In my opinion, you absolutely achieved it, and I mean you've really solidified yourself as I put on X, as the king, the queen, the fucking overlord of brutal and disquieting horror. But I mean, did you feel a lot of pressure on yourself, and how did this collection come about?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for all your kind words. That's very, very sweet of you, and I loved what you wrote on X. I thought that was amazing. We're gonna use that probably for, like, a blurb for one of my future books.
Fantastic.
Um, but as far as, like, pressure, I absolutely felt pressure with this particular collection just because, um, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There was really well received last year, and it received really great write-ups, and, like, Library Journal, I think, gave it a starred, or maybe Booklist gave it a starred review. Publishers Weekly liked it, and they're a tough nut to crack, so I thought that was excellent. So yeah, I went into this with a lot of pressure, and as I've said before, my opinion of Everything the Darkness Eats has been really complex. So the fact that that was my last release before this one, I felt an enormous pressure that I really need to raise the bar and write something that I'm really passionate about, really proud of. Not that I'm not passionate about darkness or proud of that book, like I am. But I really wanted to write something that resonated with people, that maybe resonated with people who read some of my material before and maybe didn't like it, didn't care for it. I just wanted to write something that was powerful and that was attractive to horror fans. And based on the preliminary reviews I've seen, because I do sometimes check Goodreads and NetGalley. I know I'm not probably supposed to, um, but I'm curious and I do look sometimes, and I've been really pleased to see people receiving it so well and saying such really lovely things about "The Skin Was Once Mine." um, as far as, like, how it came to be, like, quite organic. If I recall correctly, I wrote the title tale, "This Skin Was Once Mine," maybe, like, 2 or 3 years ago, and at the time, I had an in with Titan. I still obviously am still connected with Titan, and they're putting out a lot more of my books. But my agent said to me, you know, we should really consider pitching them another book for you because we had already gotten a deal with Things Have Gotten Worse and The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. So I had this novella, and my agent said, you know, we can pitch it to them, but it really needs to be like a longer book. We really need like more stories. Like maybe we could do like a collection. So I spent the next like the year or two uh, writing these other tales. I pretty much wrote them in the order that they appear in the collection. So I wrote This Skin Was Once Mine first, and then Seedling, and then All the Parts of You That Won't Easily Burn, and then finally Prickle was the last piece. And when I had collected all of them, I really noticed that there was a through line running through the stories, just about like uh, trauma and love, like how we harm the people that we supposedly love. And that's really the main like selling point, like how we pitched the collection to Titan. Um, and you know, obviously my editor was really smitten with the idea and really liked the stories. So it was a win for us, and that's kind of how it came to be. And it's been great. I mean, I feel like the Trees Grew Because I Bled There is really special in my heart. I love those stories. I feel like this collection is a really great companion piece to that book, and maybe like further explores some of the ideas that I was analyzing in that book. And now I feel like it's almost like a trilogy of short story collections, because you have my first Titan collection, which is Things Have Gotten Worse and Other Misfortunes. And then you have The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. And then finally you have This Skin Was Once Mine. So it's like a nice little trilogy that they all kind of like interact with one another. And I honestly feel like this might be the last collection I do for a while. I haven't really been writing that many short stories lately. I've really been working a lot on like longer form novels, and really developing that muscle, that writing muscle. Um, but I love this collection, and I'm really happy that it resonated with you.
Yeah, and I mean, I felt that this was even more depraved and even more about human cruelty than the previous collection, which, for people who have read the previous one, they'll be like, What do you mean there's more human cruelty? How is that even possible?" And well, you just got to pick it up and read it to find out. But I found it interesting that you said that the order of the stories is pretty much the order in which you wrote them, because for me, it felt like there was an escalation.
Hmm.
And so this had been so deliberately and meticulously curated that you'd looked through the stories, you'd looked at what order to put them in, but actually this is just how it organically came out. But it
Yeah.
as well, and I know that I'm not the first person to say this, but the ending of the final story, the final line of the final story, I mean it honestly it not just completes that story, but it completes the trilogy of collections. And it felt almost like I'd finished a concept album, listening to a concept album. And it really, yeah, it really messed me up. I mean, I knew, and we were going to talk about the stories in order, but we might just jump into talking about Prickle right now.
Sure.
But I knew, because of the way that it had been set up, and because it's an Eric LaRocca story, that we were going to get a massive escalation, but I didn't know it was going to quite jump as much as it did. And I wonder, I mean, Titan Books, they're a fairly commercial outfit. They've got other things to consider as well as the art.
Mhm.
And so were there any barriers? Was there any discussion or doubt as to whether you could do some of the things that you did with this collection and specifically with this story?
I'm really glad you brought that up because it's absolutely true. I mean, Titan Books is a really huge publisher in the UK, and they have a pretty decent publicity arm here in the US. Um, but they absolutely have other things to consider. They don't typically publish like extreme, transgressive, in your face horror. Um, so there wasn't a ton of pushback from Titan. There was a little bit of pushback from my agent and manager before we even got the collection to Titan, because they said something very similar. They were like, we're pitching this to Titan. We want to make sure like we have the best shot at getting this in with them, because some of the things here are pretty graphic and pretty obscene. And I know we're talking about Prickle now, but this applies to the title story. "This Skin Was Once Mine." There were a lot more scenes of child abuse and graphic depictions of that in that story, and I really had to edit them, a lot of pretty much all of them out, just because we wanted to make sure that, you know we probably could have sent it to Titan and see what they said, but there were elements of it that my agent thought were like a little bit problematic. Um, even down to like well, I guess we can get into spoilers maybe. Do you think we should, or?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it might be that even in answering this question, we we jump back to the skin, and then in the end, we do cover them in order. People should know with this as horror conversations with us, this could go in any
Yeah,
direction.
that's
We're talking about all four of the stories. We may do them in order. We may jump between them. That's just how it goes. But yeah, I think. I mean, I guess before any spoiler, just give a kind of spoiler warning and give people an idea as to like what's the severity of of the spoiler. Is it going to potentially spoil the whole story, or is it just like a little thematic concern?
Yeah, so I mean, this would be like a pretty big spoiler for "The Skin Was Once Mine." So if you haven't read the book yet, pause now, and if you don't want it spoiled, don't listen to what I'm about to say. um, but basically, in "The Skin Was Once Mine," I'll just give you like a little rundown of what it's about. It's about a young woman who receives word that her father has passed away, and she's asked to return back to her family home. She's been estranged from her mother for the past 20 years. She's really been like forced to live outside of her family home for most of her life. Was sent away to boarding school and just was not allowed to live at home. Was basically like abandoned by her parents, and she returns back to the family estate, and there's like a little bit of like gothic tropes going on. She's like exploring the house, and things seem off, and she discovers a secret in her father's past, and the secret is the fact that the father had been keeping a child in a bunker inside the house, and had been keeping this child alive in this young woman's and his other daughter's absence. So when I pitched this to my agent, there were some scenes that were probably a little bit too much, that were we had to cut, and also like the age of the young girl that was being kept. We had to kind of address that because it seemed like maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to have her at such a young age. We just had to kind of like finagle it so it would be like, I hate to say the word palatable, but um we just had to rework certain elements of the book to really um to get the story where we needed it to be so that it could be presentable to Titan. Um but I'm very proud of that story. I'd been working on it for a while, and there are times when I look back on it and I think, I kind of wish I did keep some of those elements that I was fighting for, that I wanted to keep in there. But I look at the finished product, at the finished story, and I feel like a lot of satisfaction. I feel like it works the way it's supposed to. I feel like maybe those scenes didn't really add much to the conversation other than just being gratuitous and just being like violence. So I think, for any authors listening, it really behooves you to look at the motivation for writing a story and writing certain scenes. Is the story just an excuse for a certain scene to happen? I remember listening to Ellen Datlow talk about certain stories, and why certain stories don't work for her when she's looking to curate her best horror of the year collections. And she had said that a lot of stories she reads for consideration don't work because they end up being excuses for horrific scenes to happen. So you have an entire an entire short story that exists to serve a punchline at the end of the piece, like a really graphic set piece. And that to her is just not interesting. And I kind of agree with what she's saying. I think that there should be something more. There should be something more to say when violence is at play in these horror pieces.
And knowing how you felt about everything the darkness eats, and particularly knowing that you felt that with the initial release you held back a bit with the bleakness, with going full Eric LaRocca, and I do hope that that will become a verb in common parlance soon. I imagine that there must have been, if not reluctance, then it must have required a great deal of thought as to whether you did or you didn't want to edit these scenes out, because I imagine that you were conscious that you didn't want to have a similar feeling
Yeah.
as to the one you'd had with Everything the Darkness Eats. So, I mean, it'd be fascinating if you could talk us more through that dilemma. And I suppose the kind of difficulty of trying to work out, okay, am I cutting something here that will ultimately compromise my art for commercial consideration and potential success? Or am I cutting something here which will serve the story and is ultimately the right choice? So, talk us through that. And I mean, I'd also be interested in what these discussions looked like with your agent and your manager. What was the back and forth when you have a discussion or a negotiation like this? Do you have some rules in terms of what you might compromise and what you won't? Is the word compromise incorrect because you won't actually compromise, but if someone can change your mind,
Mhm.
then that's the kind of route that you'll go down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to speak about negotiations with my agent and manager, it is always done with humility and respect. I never feel like ganged up on. I never feel like, oh, well, we have to cut this. Uh, with this piece in particular, I recall, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, we talked about this. We all got on a conference call and the three of us just talked through the story and what we needed to change, the elements I needed to get rid of. And parts of it were hard to hear at the time just because, like you said, I had neutered everything the darkness eats a little bit for commercial, for in order to be more commercial, for like marketability basically. And I really didn't want to do that with this piece. But as you find out when you work with these bigger publishers, they are very, against taking risks. And they really don't love pieces that are, too graphic or too in your face. Titan's been great because Titan hasn't really changed much of what I've written, and that's been great. I am working with them on my upcoming trilogy of books, and there are a lot of elements in those books that are very graphic and very disturbing. Um, and we're looking at ways to maybe soften some of those moments a little bit because they're just so unforgiving and harsh right now. Um, but like that's what I love. You know what I mean? And like I love those moments of brutality where like there is no hope and there is no light and there's just only suffering. Like I love that shit in fiction, and it's hard to walk into those meetings and receive those notes. But as far as like The Skin Was Once Mine, I felt like if I took out what was objectionable, I felt like I wouldn't be neutering the story, if that makes sense, because the story still ends on a very bleak note. It still ends, you know, uh, with hopelessness, with that kind of despair that I think I've kind of become known for with my short horror fiction. Um, so I felt okay with these changes when I received them from like Priya and Ryan, and I felt like it wouldn't undermine what I was trying to say with this piece, because the piece is about trauma, but you don't necessarily need to constantly show that trauma, that suffering. I mean, you can infer it, you can hint at it, and it doesn't lessen what the piece is about. And sometimes what you don't see is more frightening than what you do see. And what I hope is that it kind of forces readers to use their imagination more and think, oh my goodness, like, this poor girl that was kind of kept down here in this bunker, what ha, what else did she suffer from this man? Like, how else did she suffer and endure such agony? So looking back on it, I really don't regret any of the changes I made to this story. And in fact, there were elements in further on in the collection, in All the Parts of You That Won't Easily Burn, that I really thought Titan was going to push back on, especially like the ending of that piece. And I remember saying to my agent, I remember saying, like, if my editor says, we have to make changes and make edits, like I will make those edits. Because at the end of the day, I want to play ball. I I want my books out there, and I want readers. I want people interacting with my vision. And for me, you kind of have to compromise a little bit sometimes when you're working with other people and you're working at a big publishing house now. You have to be a team player basically.
Yeah, I think this is something that we've touched on in previous conversations, but I also feel this is an endless dichotomy for writers and for creatives. And it's the whole wanting to create something artistic and authentic and that represents you and your story and your vision, but also, to put it crudely, to make money. If we're
Yeah.
doing this as a full-time job or even a part-time but substantial part of our income, then that does have to be a consideration. And so, I mean, is this something you think about a lot? And I mean, since you've been doing this full time, has that shifted the way that you approach art? Have you thought about things in terms of the future? I mean, maybe there are some rules where it's like, right, if I'm making or if I've made X amount of money, then actually, instead of compromise more, I'll compromise less because I've now got this safety blanket. And I mean, it is something I consider quite a bit because, I mean, yes, we want to make money, but if this was solely about making money, then we could train as lawyers or accountants or investment bankers or doctors or whatever other job we decided would have the sufficient amount of money that would make us happy. Although ultimately we would realize that money can't make you happy and that comes from within. But, you know, what do you think in terms of on this area and how it affects your concerns both daily and indeed in terms of your career and the trajectory?
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely think of it daily because, as you said, I do right now full time, so it's my full time gig. I think I've kind of rationalized it to the point where I think to myself when I go into these rooms with editors and like my agent and my manager, I know that if I put out something completely raw that hadn't been touched by other hands, that hadn't been edited, that hadn't been, you know, looked at, that hadn't been vetted, I know for a fact it would not be a piece of quality. And I know that by pushing it through these channels, by pushing it through like an editor at Titan, an editor wherever, I know that they're going to bring um, a level of skill and like a level of intellect to the piece and really help me hone my vision, hone my craft, and make it something really special. And I trust them. I trust my editor, I trust my agent and my manager. And I know that when they tell me something and they express a concern, I know it's in my best interest to at least listen to them and consider what they're saying. Um, there are times that I've pushed back, and there's certainly been recent times where, uh, for instance, the trilogy that I'm working on for Titan, uh, there are scenes that I've been asked to maybe not cut entirely, but refocus some of the action so that it's not so graphic and not so just unpleasant to read. And I I know why I'm getting that note, and I know that I need to look at those scenes and maybe massage them a little bit. Um, so at the end of the day, I know that it doesn't come from a place of, Eric doesn't know what he's doing. We have to like completely do an overhaul on everything he's written. I know that it comes from a place of love and honor, and they want me to put out the best book possible. Um, there were in fact, it's crazy because the book that we're announcing, I'm sorry to keep teasing you with this. The book that we're announcing at the end of May, beginning of April, um, there was a scene at the very end of the book, near the end of the book, that was very, very graphic and involved a small like child, and the publisher just would not go for it. And I took it out because I feel like the book just wouldn't have been published if we kept it in there. Like they just weren't going to publish it if I kept that. If I fought for it, like no. Sometimes you have to fold sometimes, and you have to just be like, you know what? Do I want this book to exist? Yeah, I do. I'm going to have to give in. And it's not giving up your autonomy. It's just, do you want to play the game or not? Like, do you want to be in the game? And I want to be in the game. So I folded and I said, okay, fine, we'll cut this scene. But I look back on that manuscript and I do think that they were right. I think they made the right choice because the scene, without it, it's fine. It added a punch. The scene definitely added a punch, but maybe we didn't need that at that moment. And I'm sure if we had kept it in there, some readers would have been like, this is so gratuitous. Like, why is this in here? There's just a million reasons why things get cut. Um, so, yeah, that's my long, rambling answer of how I feel about, commerce versus art and making edits.
Yeah, and even when we cut these scenes, I mean, as long as we preserve them somewhere on our hard drive, then they're always there should there be a need or a curiosity for the extreme edition or
Yeah,
the special no cuts.
yeah,
Or maybe there are some cuts in a different way, but yeah.
exactly.
I mean it yeah, I think really much like, when you're posting something publicly, whether a scene does or doesn't ultimately get included is going to vary from book to book, from project to project. Because I mean, you got a lot of pushback or quite an angry response from certain readers over one of the scenes in Everything the Darkness Eats. But for you, that was a non negotiable. That was absolutely going in. But then with this other forthcoming book, it sounds like it might have been a scene along similar lines in terms of reader response, but it was like, okay, on this occasion, it can be cut. So,
I think it just depends on the project. The project that's coming out that we haven't announced yet is very bleak to begin with.
yeah.
It's very dark, and it just, I mean, that scene, it was just like more relentless brutality, and at
Mm,
that point the editor was just like, there's no point to this right here. So I was like, okay, fine, we'll cut it. um I'm not thrilled about that, but that's okay. There will be an uncensored version maybe one day. And that's the thing, like you said, like these scenes, we just save them on our hard drive and then we put them out like 10 years from now when people want the uncensored version.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it. And I mean, there may even be a curiosity in decades where you have so many novels worths of these kind of cut scenes. And I mean, I think just as a curiosity, you could almost put a compendium of
Yeah,
cut scenes. It's like, look, th- this is a different type of horror, but if you're in for it, then well, strap in. Here we go.
yeah, that's not a bad idea actually.
Yeah.